Let me talk a little bit about sin. If I asked you, what is sin? What would you say?
Disobedience.
Okay. I want to raise some of this. Separated from God, disobedience. When I was growing up, and I think still at times today, we can look at sin as being a thing. Something that we do, or something that we don't do. I mean, it's pretty common. People talk about, and we prepare the kids and to say, okay, now's the time to confess your sins. I think we need to step back, not that that's wrong, because I think there are certain things that we do that are sinful. But I think we need to start in the context, from the context of God calls us. If you look at what are the two greatest commandments? To love God with all of our mind, our heart, our soul, and our strength. And the other one is to love each other, to love our neighbors ourselves. So if we start with the aspect of love, that God calls us to love, that's what He does. And He calls us not only to love God, but He calls us to love our neighbor. He calls us into a relationship of love with both of those aspects, and they intertwine. When we sin, there's a tendency to say, again, like I said, from scripturally, if you look at the Old Testament, sin was always defined as missing the mark. When you sin, you miss the mark. You miss the mark of how you're called to live. You wander off. You know, beautiful story about the one sheep that wandered off, and Jesus went and left the 99 to go get the one. When we sin, we fail to love. We fail to love God and or our neighbor as He calls us to love. And in the part of that, then we develop some guilt. We don't feel good about it. I always tell teenagers, when I hear confessions with them celebrate the Sacrament of Reconciliation, and they'll confess something that's pretty serious, pretty grave. And they'll say, you know, Father Danny, when I was doing that, or was going to do that, I knew in the pit of my stomach it was the wrong thing to do. I knew. But I did it. Or, I did it, whatever it may be, and then afterwards, I realized I should have never done that. I felt guilty. Guilt, my friends, there is what I always say, there is good guilt. Guilt is that barometer. It tells you. But there's also bad guilt, where we can walk around so scrupulous that everything I do is wrong, and I'm such a bad person, etc., etc. But guilt is that barometer that helps us to identify sometimes, you know, I don't like the way I've done that. And I think we as adults, no different than teenagers or children, know that experience. Sin, if we take it from the aspect of a relationship, is when in some way we have hurt that relationship that we have. God has said, I love you. I care for you. I give of my whole self to you. But I also want you to give of your whole self to the other person, to your neighbor. And as 1 John would say, if you say you love God, but you do not love your neighbor, you're a liar. Well, that's a pretty bold statement. You know? What they're getting back to is to say, how can we say we love God if we don't love our neighbor? It didn't say that it's difficult, or it's, you know, or there are times when we're challenged by that. Sure it is. I mean, you look at, I mean, there's a lot of images that come to mind of people that have been hurt profoundly, and maybe some of us.